so excited to be here and sharing the stage with Daniel from Kind today. Just to kind of give you guys a heads up, Kind is now 11 years into its business. And Daniel, part of the reason Daniel's here today is he just recently published a book called Do the Kind Thing. We're going to touch on a little bit about some of the ideas behind the business, how it's grown to where it is today, touch on the book a little bit, and then just so that you all know, at the break, Daniel's going to be available to sign copies of his book as well. So just one more time, if we can welcome him onto the stage, that would be great. So as a kickoff question, I'm curious, at the business you have this philosophy of philosophy. And if you could just talk a little bit about how, what that idea is and how that resonates in the daily practices of the business, that would be fantastic.
So our philosophy is to try to challenge conventional wisdom and try to see if you can pursue objectives that are they seem to be at tension with one another, and try to think creatively and outside the box to see if you can do both things at once. So the way this whole way of thinking started is prior to Kind, I started a company called Peaceworks that was using business to bring neighbors together in conflict regions, to get Israelis and Arabs to trade with one another, and to use the power of economics to connect neighbors, to shatter stereotypes and cement relations. And with Kind, we decided that we wanted to challenge the conventional wisdom that you could only make money or do well, and so we're trying to find something that's economically sustainable and socially impactful, something where you can make products that are nutritious and helpful and delicious, when you can make something that's convenient and wholesome. And the way of thinking with requires for you to think very critically about what are the underlying assumptions that are making you think that you can only do one thing or the other. And if you're able to isolate those assumptions, then asking why is it this way, why not differently? And sometimes our brains train us to be very efficient with our thinking, so we go to the most efficient answer, but in the long term it might not be the optimal answer. Sometimes when you think a little bit harder up front and challenge those conventional wisdoms, particularly the things that we hold closest to our daily lives because we're most used to doing them, that's when you have the opportunity to create the most value, when you think very critically about every moment.
And so I know the audience is always interested in understanding the process of innovation, especially as a business that's now well established. 11 years in, what is that sort of process of continuing to reinvent yourself and really pushing the envelope further?
I think it has to do with the culture that you create in your team and in yourself and in your own mind. With our team, we really, really encourage people to stand up and disagree. When I'm in a meeting and nobody's disagreeing, I get very, very scared because I tend to have very provocative ideas sometimes. So I really encourage people to bring out that other view. If everybody's going in one direction, I try to bring the devil's advocate view. In my team, they call it the Mexican Inquisition. So I'm a confused Mexican Jew trying to get people to do all this stuff. So, but really creating an environment where you prize people sharing what they believe and bringing out views and taking risks, and never ever chastise someone from having a different view from yours, quite the opposite. And whether someone's right or wrong, the marketplace of ideas will sort it out if you're making sure that you're questioning all of your assumptions, encouraging people, regardless of how long they've been in the company or their seniority, to feel comfortable. Because a lot of times, the younger people or the people that just came out are going to have the most fresh and disruptive perspectives. It's very important for them to not feel like they don't have a role to challenge everything. And it's connected also to our culture, where we have an ownership mentality, an ownership culture, because every team member in our company is a shareholder. And it's not just that we give them a financial stake in our future, it's also that we create a culture that prizes that sense of ownership, taking decisions on their own. And we're not perfect, but, we just hired an amazing head of marketing who's much, much more senior than anyone we've ever had before. And so I need to learn every day to step back. And part of, I think, why we're succeeding is we're attracting people that are better than us at what they do. That's another process of, it's easy to say, but it actually requires all of us to control our egos a little bit. Our egos are healthy, but sometimes you don't want to you want to be careful not to prevent great people from coming in because you don't want them to compete with you or overshadow you. You need to embrace that sense that the unity of purpose and all of us as a family and as a team are going to succeed together, and be careful never to think, oh, this person's too good for me, because subconsciously you might have team members that feel, well, this person's better than me. That should be the standard. Our standard when we hire people is when somebody replaces themselves and they're going to move to another part of the team, they need to replace themselves with someone they consider to be better than they are. And that's where we try to aim, and I think we have that opportunity. And it's also a lot about personal introspection, about being very self-critical, about being comfortable having a conversation with yourself every day about what's important to you, about what you did wrong. My team always laughs at me that after every presentation I ask them, what did I do wrong? What could I, and they, this is, again, is that Mexican, Jewish, paranoid person. But I do think that it provides you an opportunity to be better, and particularly when you have challenges. How many of you guys have tried Kind Bars? And how many of you read in the last couple of days about the FDA letter? So this for me is a very, very important opportunity to try to learn from that ourselves and to embrace it. We had, for those that don't know, we had a letter sent by the FDA that got a lot of media attention because we've always been the media darlings. This is our first growing up moment where for the first time people criticized us. In 11 years, we've never, ever had one single moment of negative media. And then in the last 48 hours, we got 350 stories that were, some of them were very fair and balanced. Some of them were making fun of us, because the FDA actually told us that 4 of our bars out of 50 products had used the term healthy inappropriately, because they said that we didn't meet their regulatory standard of healthy because our products contained more than 1.5% of saturated fat. But all of our products contain nuts, and nuts contain fat. And fat is good for you from nuts. The fat from nuts is actually, there's so much evidence that it helps you. But it could have been easy for us to just say the FDA is wrong and we did nothing wrong. And we didn't take that stand. We accepted that we made a mistake. We do think that the regulatory standard for the definition of healthy needs to be updated, and we're going to work to educate the public about it. But we embraced the mistake that we made of incorrectly labeling those 4 items with the term healthy as a nutrient claim. The FDA doesn't have a problem with us talking about our products and our company as healthy, but for those 4, when you make what they call a nutrient claim, they have a statutory definition, and we screwed up, and we owned up to it. We talked to the community, and then we're going internally through an exercise to think about how do we address those issues internally to become stronger. How do we embrace those challenges to make them as opportunities? And when I look back at my life, I've had a few moments. The first 10 years of starting Peaceworks are all challenges and failures. But then over the last 11 years with Kind, it's just had such a great rise. And there's been very few moments where we've had such big setbacks. And when you look back, they actually were the moments where we grew the most. Because those challenges present you the opportunity to really rise up and to turn that crisis into an opportunity and to test the measure of your character, of your sense of your values and of how you're going to deal with those, not to just sweep them or swipe them away.
Either way.
Sweep them or swipe them away, but to try to own up to them, to say, hey, how can we be better, and how can we embrace now this newfound attention to talk about the issue of nuts, to talk about our products, and to take responsibility.
So it's interesting. Obviously, there's a lot in there in terms of that sort of ownership, the two-way relationship now between companies and their employees, companies and their customers. You've just gone through this process of taking a lot of the business lessons that you learned not only through Kind, but also through all the other businesses that you've opened. I wonder if you can share a couple lessons from that book and kind of give the audience a sense of some of the things that they can take away from you going on this journey and really sort of formalizing that thinking.
Yeah, no, it was a really exhausting but really interesting exercise, because it's actually not just the last 11 years, but 30 plus years of lessons. And I focused a lot on the failures, and I studied them very deeply. And I go a lot into the book about what does it mean to talk with yourself, and how do you do creative brainstorming, and how do you think critically. And I talk a lot about the unstructured brainstorming that you can do with yourself every day, and how my brain operates. And I just tried to actually digest that, and I was like, holy shit, I'm really a freak. But I tried to share with people how I do my brainstorming process. And then we also have at Kind a methodology that we use for creative brainstorming and for creating ideas. So I described that methodology. So there's a structured way to do it and an unstructured way. And just to finish on that point, I really do think, and I also talk a lot about how do you talk with yourself, because in today's day and age, all of us are just so overwhelmed with inputs. Like when you are not in an engagement with a person, you're on your computer, or when you're walking, you're looking at your iPhone, or on the elevator, you're doing it. So you don't have time to reflect, to digest. Your brain needs that breathing space, and I'm terrible at it too, but it's so important to carve out those times to have a very deep conversation with yourself, and to try to really think about what matters to you, what you care about, because if you don't engage in that journey and in that conversation with yourself, you have much less of a chance of fulfilling your dreams and of living a meaningful life according to your definition of what's meaningful, because if you don't understand what's meaningful to you, how are you going to then follow that path? So I talk a lot about that. I can keep going, but I'll share one last one. In the life of an entrepreneur, there are two very important phases that you need to separate. One is the skeptic phase, and the other one is the evangelist phase. And I also describe those more in depth, but the skeptic phase is when it's either an entrepreneurial venture or an idea. You need to separate them. The first one has to be the very critical research, and really almost like a trial by intellectual fire, where you really ask people to criticize your ideas, where you criticize them, where you do a lot of competitive thing, and you really question whether your idea makes any sense. And during that phase, you need to be very comfortable walking away from an idea, and very comfortable being as critical as you can be. And only if you go through that really, really thoughtful deconstruction and analysis of whether the idea makes sense, and if you survive that trial by fire, then at that time you need to flip a switch. And you go from the skeptic to the evangelist. And then when you become the evangelist, it's a different mindset. Nobody can stop you. You've done the research, you know that it makes sense, you know that you're going to do it, you know that you looked into yourself and that you've got what it takes, and then you just go for it, and you do not let anybody stop you. You do not let yourself stop yourself, you don't let any critics. You do listen for pivoting and feedback, but you are there to get to the finish line. You need to continue, and it's very important to separate them, because if you jump into the second one without thinking critically, you might be going on a journey that's really quite stupid. But if you're always just criticizing yourself, you might not have the lasting power to get to that finishing line. So you need to separate between being comfortable with criticizing the ideas, but staying strong to your beliefs.
Fantastic. And maybe as a last question, obviously, given the fact that Kind has a social mission at the core of its business, and I think we all recognize the fact that as a society, there's these major issues that are sort of at play. And I wonder what you think the role of brand should be in helping come up with solutions and help sort of shape the future that we're all trying to achieve.
Yeah, I think about this issue a lot. I've been thinking about it for many years. the challenges that we're going to face as a society are bigger than any of us realize. From climate change to resource scarcity, the problems that we're having with sourcing almonds, with water scarcity in California, with food scarcity in the last 3-4 years. There have been major displacements, and we're just facing the beginning of it. And nuclear proliferation, the problems with the rise of Islamic State, these are major challenges that we're only going to be able to confront if we recognize our shared humanity and our shared role to tackle them. And what most permeates our lives nowadays is the private sector. You know, in the 15th century, it was the medieval state where it was the church that organized society. And then in the 16th, 17th century, the government, the nation state rose up, and it was the government that was the unifying model. But starting in the 18th and 19th century, and certainly in the 20th century, the private sector rose to really, really drive most of our lives. And everywhere you look, we are so impacted by the private sector. And between that and now technology empowering the individual, there's so much potential for us as individuals and us as companies to make a difference. And the old constructs of you have to be a business that needs to focus on money, or a nonprofit that needs to focus on social good, make no sense. They're constructs from the tax code that are so obsolete, and we need to think with that and say, hey, can you actually find a way to advance a sustainable business model that can also try to make this world a little bit better? Just make your small contribution. What do you care about, and how can you do it? And if you authentically and sincerely find something you care about and find a way to make those forces or those things, rather than be in tension, reinforce one another, you can create a business model for enormous impact. And that's what we're trying to do.
Fantastic. As I mentioned, Daniel's going to be available at the break. And please continue the conversation. And thank you all so much. Thanks for joining me on stage.